What is happening now is that we have actually total disconnect between the demonstrators and the regime figures that they are still in power. There is a total disconnect, and the protesters are not listening to what the political figures are saying, and vice versa. So the political leaders or the NDP leaders that they are still in power, they are not listening to what the people are saying. So we have a total disconnect. The army here, the army that is still having an important role and being respected by the demonstrators, and the demonstrators are still listening and willing to listen to what the army has to say.
So but has the army made it clear that it will be continuing to play its traditional role, which is safeguarding the regime, the government?
I am afraid that the army is really getting to a very critical point, and they have an opportunity, and if they don't take this opportunity, then it will become too late for the army, because this is exactly the same the style of development that happened over the past 3 weeks. President Mubarak had an opportunity in the first 2 days of the demonstrations to delegate power to Omar Suleiman and to stay in Egypt and for things to move on. He did not take that opportunity. Then we started to see the ceiling is getting significantly higher for the people and for the demonstrators. And then 1 week later, it was too late for Mubarak to take this opportunity. At the same time, Omar Suleiman also had an opportunity the first 2 weeks. Actually, he was still an acceptable face for the demonstrators and for the people. Not entirely acceptable, but the demonstrators were willing to compromise and to accept for him to take a position. Unfortunately, he missed that opportunity and started talking and making some statements that made no sense for the people, and he missed the opportunity. Therefore, I am now encouraging the army is to take this opportunity and make a decision, because I am seriously worried that if the army stays stays longer until they make a decision, then it will become even too late for the army, because the army now can make a decision, and they should take care of this. They should take advantage of this opportunity and play the decisive role and put an end to this and make the revolution.
And they will not want to be seen by the people as lagging behind.
Exactly.
People as lagging behind.
Exactly.
Having cultivated such close ties and so much respect, it appears, from the people. We are hearing reports that the Secretary General of the ruling NDP, National Democratic Party, Hassan Badrawi, someone who was just appointed to this position a few days ago, having taken over from Gamal Mubarak, the son of President Mubarak, has now resigned. We heard that the Culture Minister also resigned a couple of days ago. Are we beginning to see serious cracks?
Absolutely, Rida. You are certainly asking the right question, because this is exactly what we should be monitoring. Hassan Badrawi seemed to be he has a history. First of all, he's a very well-respected person, and he historically actually played an opposition role within the National Democratic Party. He's a very credible person within, as seen by many within the National Democratic Party and within the people. So when he was called, he was distanced during the past years from taking the leadership of the National Democratic Party, because again, due to the close alliance between the leaders of the National Democratic Party and the regime. So Hassan Badrawi realized lately that he was set up for failure, and he was called in for this impossible mission, is to salvage what's left of the National Democratic Party. And actually he made, in my opinion, he absolutely certainly made a right decision by distancing himself from this regime and from what is going on, because he made a very clear statement yesterday, as we know, that he was expecting or said the right thing for President Mubarak to step aside. And that is exactly what is the position that is expected from those who still care about the people's demands and the people's requests. So Hassan Badrawi, with his history and his credentials, he is a very well-respected person again, and by distancing himself, it's a very strong indicator that What we are seeing in the National Democratic Party is, again, what I mentioned previously, is the intra-party conflict that will only be expected to escalate and to develop, and things that will be taking different roads.
And just to update our viewers as we continue to look at these images from Liberation Square, where it is coming up to 6 p.m. in the evening, we have reports that senior military officers have entered the state television building in Cairo, perhaps an indication that the statement state television said a little bit earlier would come from the presidential palace may be imminent. That at a time when protesters have also been rallying around the state television building. We of course will monitor that very closely and bring that statement to our viewers as soon as we get it. Ibrahim Sharkey, looking at the statements that have come out of Washington, other Western capitals, but mostly Washington, how much confusion do you see in the U.S. position? There have been conflicting signals, but all along President Obama has refused to ask President Mubarak to step down. He's always couched his language in very vague terms, talking about a transition having to begin now, but never asking for Mubarak to step down, despite the frustration that has crept into the narrative that we hear now from the Vice President Joe Biden. Still, Washington is focusing on issues that do not really have a direct bearing now, at least, on the life of Egyptians. They're talking about emergency law being lifted, the importance of that. Where was the United States for 30 years when the emergency law was in effect? Why make these statements now? What kind of signal does that send to the protesters in Tahrir Square and beyond?
Unfortunately, that the army is not the only player in this uprising that has an opportunity to take advantage of now and is not taking it. The U.S. administration is certainly in a similar position, where they had really an opportunity over the past 3 weeks to make a decisive role and to help in a peaceful transition, and for America to stick to its democratic principles and to its democratic values, but unfortunately, sadly speaking, that has not been the case, although we have
seen... How much of this U.S. position do you think has to do with the Israel lobby pushing for the U.S. administration to keep the status quo in Egypt?
Certainly, the position of the U.S. administration is that outcome of different lobbying groups that they are working in the United States. And so the final outcome of a U.S. administration position that we have seen, it reflects the struggle and the lobbying between the lobbying groups. For this, the Israeli lobby is likely active in this role. The Israeli position has been made very publicly, has been made very clear that they're supporting the regime, and we will continue to see how it's going to develop.
Ibrahim Sharkey of the Brookings Institution in Doha, thank you very much for your perspective on this. Let's speak now to our correspondent, Raouya Rageh. She's outside the presidential palace in Cairo. When we spoke a little bit earlier, Raouya, you were saying that the numbers were beginning to increase. What's the situation like outside the presidential palace now?
There's at least 10,000 people or more here outside the presidential palace. More crowds keep joining the gathering here. The numbers are increasing, and two very interesting developments happened in the last couple of hours. Earlier in the morning, we were reporting that there was increased tension between the crowds here, and some officers, people perhaps feeling frustrated by the military's communique. But just in the last hour, the tanks that are behind the barbed wire, the protesters are separated from the tanks around the presidential palace by a barbed wire. And the tanks behind the barbed wire moved their barrels sideways. Initially, the barrels were facing the protesters, and once the barrels were moved sideways, the crowd erupted, cheering and clapping. Another very interesting development as well, the military perhaps trying to even come closer to the people, started posting the pictures of some of those who had lost their lives since the January 25th protest on the tanks. These people, of course, are being hailed here as martyrs. Very interesting development that has increased the excitement of the crowd here.
Raghi, thanks very much for now for that update. I'm Rida Fakhri, you're watching Al Jazeera. I leave you with Adrian Finnegan, who continues a live, continuous coverage of the unfolding events in Egypt on day 18 of the mass demonstrations across the country.